Good morning, everyone. My name is Nadita Ramachala. I'm the manager of the Standardization Division at TTBS, and I will be moderating today's session. I would first like to welcome all the participants to our stakeholder consultation on 2 draft compulsory standards that we are issuing for public comments. Firstly, electrical accessories and components, and secondly, lighting products. So on behalf of TTBS, I extend a warm welcome, and I will now turn you over to Mr. Jose Trejo, our Executive Director. I will give a brief background for Mr. Trejo. Mr. Trejo is a Belizean national, and he has spent 22 years serving the people of Belize and now Trinidad and Tobago. Prior to joining the service, he has worked at the Central Bank of Belizeability for the compilation of Belize balance of payment statistics. An economist by training, he holds a Master of Arts degree in International Affairs with a concentration in development economics. I will just skip ahead to his experience within the quality infrastructure. During the period 2015 to 2017, he served as the chairman and coordinator of the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, headquartered in Barbados, and the sub-regional Central American grouping of the Inter-American Metrology System, respectively. He has previously served as the director of the Belize Bureau of Standards during the period 2007 to TS in February of this year. We will make all the bios available for the participants today. So Kimberly Badley will share a link. So I will now turn the session over to Mr. Trejo to deliver some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Nadita. Good morning and welcome. As the Executive Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the manufacturers, distributors, importers, and retailers of electrical accessories, components, and lighting products who are in attendance today. Today's consultation revolves around 2 essential draft standards, as Nadita would have pointed out earlier. TTCS 23, which focuses on electrical accessories and components, and TTCS 24, which pertains to electrical lighting products. These standards are designed to ensure the safety and quality of electrical products used in Trinidad and Tobago. TTCS 23 specifies the safety requirements for all electrical accessories and components, including labeling information to be placed on the products and packaging. Likewise, TTCS 24 outlines safety requirements for electrical lighting products encompassing a wide range of items such as fluorescent lamps, tungsten filament lamps, LED lamps, seasonal and holiday decorative products, and luminaires. As can be said of most stakeholder engagements of this nature, our consultation today is to gather valuable insights and feedback from stakeholders like you as we revise these draft standards. Our aim is to align them with the principles of good regulatory practices while ensuring the health and safety of consumers. The rationale for implementing these compulsory standards is clear. We want to protect consumers and users from potential health and safety hazards. Additionally, these standards seek to safeguard public and industrial health, welfare, and safety, as well as ensure acceptable quality in products, whether they are for domestic use or export. In our efforts to achieve compliance to these standards, we aim to guarantee that consumers have access to relevant information, enabling them to make informed purchasing decisions. Furthermore, these standards will help prevent fraud and misrepresentation arising from misleading advertising or labels. At this juncture, it is important to note that the development of these draft standards is aligned with the strategic objectives of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards and the National Standardization Strategy. It falls within our mandate and the Standards Act number 18 of 1987 to ensure the safety and quality of products sold or used in Trinidad and Tobago, excluding food, drugs, and cosmetics. These draft standards establish the minimum requirements for electrical accessories, components, and lighting products, prioritizing the health and safety of consumers. Today, I encourage each of you to actively participate in this consultation. Your expertise, insights, and feedback are essential in shaping these standards to best meet the needs of our industry and the interests of our consumers. Once again, I extend my gratitude to all of you for being here today and for your commitment to ensuring the safety and quality of electrical accessories, components, and lighting products in the country. Contributions and collaboration are invaluable as we work together to enhance consumer protection and promote a culture of quality. Thank you, and I wish you a productive and engaging meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Trejo, for giving us that opening remarks, and we look forward to a lot of support from our stakeholders today. So I will now go to the next agenda item. So I will be doing a presentation, giving an overview of the standards development process. So I will be sharing my screen in 1 minute. So let me share, and we will start off my presentation. So just confirming that everyone can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kimberly. So a lot of persons today will be very familiar with the TTBS, but at today's I wanted to highlight some of the critical aspects of our national quality infrastructure, national quality development process that we use. So TTBS, we have several responsibilities under the Standards Act number 18 of 1997. And firstly, we are the standards body. We are also the national quality certifying body, as well as the national laboratory accreditation body. Under our Metrology Act number 18 of 2004, we are also given a significant responsibilities with regard to national measurement, and we have the NMI, as we call it, at the TTBS. And to support our work at TTBS, we have the National Quality Policy. I'll be touching on that briefly, as well as our National Standardization Strategy, which helps us to prioritize the standards projects that we undertake within a 3-year period. So turning our attention now to the national quality infrastructure, I would have highlighted some of the key roles of TTBS, but the national quality infrastructure being a wider ecosystem involving private sector, the government, the public sector organizations, and some commercial entities dealing with conformity assessment. As we have laid it out here, I will start in the middle. As TTBS, we're responsible for national standardization. We also facilitate input tests. And we also have some other entities within Trinidad and Tobago being responsible for standardization. I will highlight the role of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, having responsibility for standardization in that particular area of telecommunications. And we also have the Environmental Management Authority. So there are other agencies with an ability for standards development, but within the national legislation or Standards Act, TTBS has been appointed as a national standards body, excluding the area of food, drugs, and cosmetics. We also have testing and inspection. So with regard to our compulsory standards that we'll be talking about a little later on, TTBS is an internationally recognized inspection body. So we have been accredited to the ISO IC 17020 standard. We also have within TTBS certification, and we have the certification division offering a number of certification schemes in the area. We have mandatory product certification, where we have compulsory standards. And I should highlight that within the local landscape, we have a number of foreign certification bodies that operate locally as well. So you may be familiar with BSI, UL, SGS, and those are some of the more well-known certification bodies. And I would have highlighted the role of metrology. We have the responsibility for verification. So you may have seen the yellow stickers at the fuel dispensers. This is one of TTBS's key regulatory role to ensure accurate measurement. We also have a significant presence in the local markets where we would do verification of scales. So our metrology activities are currently being rolled out to get a deeper impact on accurate measurement systems within the country. And we also have a responsibility for ensuring traceability to the international systems. So at the pinnacle, we have accreditation, and TTBS, we do have our TT labs presently, and we are undergoing a process of separating the accreditation function so that they can be an internationally recognized accreditation body. And this will allow accreditation and that's new entity to certify bodies that conduct certification, testing, and inspection. And I should highlight a significant portion of TTBS's work is in the area of testing, where we have a number of laboratories. Again, there are a number of laboratories that exist in the local landscape. So as I said, it is a wide ecosystem, and we like to ensure collaboration and coordination of all the different parties. So you'll see on one hand, we have regulatory functions. I would have mentioned our compulsory standards and essentially taken the form of technical regulations. And the intent of the national quality infrastructure would be to support export competitiveness, the diversification of our national economy, as well as support the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as to support our own Vision 2030, which is the National Development Strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. Here, standards being applicable to a wide number of products and service development along different value chains within different sectors, including both services and products. So I will just go to the next slide now to highlight our national quality policy. This is a cabinet appointed policy. It was approved in 2018, and it is a basic government instrument that sets out the objectives and strategies of Trinidad and Tobago regarding the development and use of quality infrastructure in relation to its economic and societal needs and the building of a national quality culture. I should highlight at this point that TTBS is engaged of the quality infrastructure, the primary beneficiaries being the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as our local producers, importers, to ensure the well-being of the society, but also to support our socioeconomic development. And we have recently launched a National Quality Awards. And this is to recognize companies that have embraced the philosophy of quality and companies that have been utilizing quality tools to support their business operations, whether it be to improve competitivity of their products and services. So we have a wide range of impacts in terms of recognizing the benefits of using quality tools within the local industry. And at the international level, the quality infrastructure is really used as a tool to support and recognize different trading arrangements. So if we have the recognized products that are certified and meet certain standards and technical regulations, it would mean that we can trade easily with other parties and support the number of trade agreements that the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has negotiated. And at a very high level, we have the QI covering the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looking at prosperity, people, and planet. And these goals have been within our Vision 20 work that the government is doing, as well as teaching the economic development of our country and the overall society within the country. And this is premised on having that quality, culture, and awareness within the society. As I highlighted, we are looking at the quality policy, and this is the government's intentions regarding the development of what we call the QI, or the quality infrastructure, but it is also supportive and coordinated with other policies that may be issued at the government level or the national level. So it supports trade, science and technology. And here under science and technology, I would also add innovation as well. So recently, TTBS would have created a national mirror committee to look at how we can encourage the use of innovation systems within companies locally. It supports environment, as we have heard before, food safety, although TTBS does not have the direct responsibility for ensuring food safety within the country. We have a fairly good working relationship with the Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division that has that direct responsibility. As I said, the quality infrastructure and the different services that are available under the QI supports the development of industries, and we're also looking at protecting our consumers. Turning our attention now to our standards related mandate. So I'm from Standardization Division, which is one part of the TTBS's organizational structure. We have the direct responsibility for the development and maintenance of standards, and standards are generally developed for the improvement of goods produced or used in Trinidad and Tobago to ensure industrial efficiency and development, to promote public and industrial welfare, health and safety. And within recent times, we have seen a lot of issues coming up at the national level, which resonates with the health and safety mandate of the TTBS, as well as for the protection of the environment, to help us facilitate our work at the standardization division and the wider society. We have different levels of standardization. So here I will highlight 4 distinct levels. So of course, TTBS being the national standards body, we operate at the national level. We are also involved in regional standardization. So we have CrossQ, which is the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, being one of the instruments under the harmonized standards to facilitate regional standards are being developed right now in areas such as food, for example, regional energy efficiency building codes about energy efficiency labeling of refrigerating appliances and air conditioners. So the intent at the regional level is to support competitiveness of the CARICOM region and ensure that we ensure that the level of products being traded meet the requirements of standards and also support technical regulations where necessary. At the regional level, there's another organization called COPANT, which is the Pan American Standards Commission, and this comprises standards bodies from North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. One of the main objectives here is to exchange best practices around standardization. And you may be very familiar with ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, being responsible for standards such as the well-known ISO 9000 on quality management, 14,000 on environmental management. More recently, TTBS would have adopted a number of standards in the area of information security management systems or cloud computing as well, all being issued by ISO, and then TTBS is allowed to adopt these standards at the national level. We also hosted a major meeting on governance of organizations, and we have adopted 4 international standards that cover governance or whistleblowing, compliance management systems, and anti-bribery. And we also have the IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission, covering products that fall under the electrotechnical area. So covering things like smart grids, a number of appliance standards, as well as support and sustainability issues as well. So these are 2 of the 3 international standards bodies, the third being the International Telecommunications Union, and our Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago is mainly responsible for coordinating participation in that international body. So you can see that TTBS is well represented within the regional and international standards development body. And the benefit, of course, being to the society and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, where we can influence the content of regional and international standards. So throughout our work program for the year, there are many regional projects as well as international standards that we're adopting throughout our standards work program in support of our national standardization strategy. And we would seek feedback from stakeholders into these regional and international standardization processes. Just to recap quickly, what is a standard? And Kimberly will be speaking about 2 compulsory standards in today's session. It is a document established by consensus. This is approved by record standards, can take the form of rules, guidelines, processes, services, and systems. And TTBS has a number of standards that fall into all of these categories. And I will make the distinction between what we call voluntary standards and compulsory standards in another slide. So touching on the compulsory standards here, the compulsory standards are effectively technical regulations. And as the technical regulations are developed, it is critical that we get feedback from one that we're doing now, where we get feedback from stakeholders directly. We would issue the standards for public comment and try to get as much feedback as possible to help us finalize these standards, because as a technical regulation, it is enforceable by law. And we'll speak a bit about how TTBS would basically enforce the requirements of the compulsory standards. There are 2 main mechanisms that we would use. For imported products, we would generally have an inspection process. And later on in today's agenda, you will hear from Mr. Irvin Butron from the Implementation Division, where there are local producers or manufacturers producing products that fall under compulsory standard. We would utilize a product certification scheme. So this would be a mandatory scheme where local manufacturers are mandated to comply with requirements of the compulsory standard. And on the voluntary side, we have standards such as the ISO 9001, 14,000 for environment, and 50,000 covering energy management. These standards are generally used in a voluntary way, so it is up to the companies and organizations to use at their discretion. However, on the compulsory side, this is a legal requirement because they do have the force of law, and TTBS has a responsibility for ensuring compliance. So just to highlight, standards are part of our everyday life. So we can have standards covering a number of things, or appliances, electric vehicles. Touching on the environmental side, we would have done some work on the circular economy. So we are participating in an international technical committee looking at developing standards for the circular economy. And we also have a number of other products and service standards to support tourism, construction, electrical, etc. To go through very quickly our standards development process, so it is aligned to the international process that is generally used. First, there has to be a need for standard identified. The mechanism or the methodology that we're doing now is a national standardization strategy. And this is based on collection of stakeholder information, feedback, looking at some data, and we'll touch on that briefly. We also have the technical and market research. So once a standard has been developed, or we have standards officers that would be assigned different projects, they will conduct the technical and market research to help prepare what we call a working draft. And then we would assemble a specification or a technical committee to help review the draft standard and formulate the requirements of the draft standard. And then we will get to stage 5, which is where we are at with these 2 standards. So these 2 draft standards will be issued for public comment shortly. You will see 3 ads in the daily newspapers. So Kimberly will touch on that. We generally use a 60-day period for the public comment, and this is an alignment with the requirements of the World Trade Organization under the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, where countries are mandated to issue for comment or for public review compulsory standards, the WTO would use the term technical regulation. So before any technical regulation is issued, we have to get feedback from all the WTO members. And this will allow the international parties to comment on the process. So once the public comment period is completed, we would have a number of comments that would come in, and we would resolve the comments. And this is done with the support of the committee that was established previously. After that, after all the comments have been addressed satisfactorily, then we would submit the draft standard for some internal approval. So we have a technical and marketing committee of the TTBS. So this is under the board of directors. There's a subcommittee. They would review and then make a recommendation to the TTBS's board of directors that will be responsible for the clearance standards. And I would like to highlight here that all national standards are declared or approved by the board of directors. If the standard is voluntary, we would move to the publication stage. And more recently, we have been doing electronic publication. So we have an e-store where standards are available for sale. If the standard is compulsory, the Minister of Trade, the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry, is responsible for conferring compulsory status to the compulsory standard, which gives the legal authority to the TTBS to enforce the requirements of the compulsory standard. So just to touch on the wide area of standards development at TTBS, we have chemical, so a lot of consumer goods. So we will hear later on this month, a draft standard is being issued for cleaning, disinfectant, and bleaching agents. So we'll be seeking feedback from stakeholders on that. We also have a number of standards in the area of construction products. More recently, we would have developed a compulsory standard for ready mix. So we touch on tourism, mechanical equipment and packaging, petrochemicals, quality, ICT, renewable energy, as well as textiles. So this is all based on what stakeholders would have prioritized as key standards projects. We intend to support the government initiatives. So this is where we have our national standardization strategy. We collect data on GDP, export potential. We look at any social issues that may come up. And this basically outlines our 3-year work program with regard to standards. I would highlight that our National Standardization Strategy, or NSS, is available on the TTBS's website. So please give us any feedback on the program, or if there are any new and immediate objectives to ensure a robust and responsive national standardization strategy to create a standards society. And very importantly, using ICT tools to modernize the standards development process and improve access to standards. And of course, out of scope being some of the primary areas of focus, and ensuring that we can support the national achievement of the UN SDGs. In that regard, we have been looking at some new areas of standardization, touching on sustainability, governance, climate change. I would have highlighted circular economy, innovation management as well, and also looking at sustainable building materials. So just in terms of the availability of standards, we have moved to a more electronic environment. Standards are available for sale via our e-store, so you have the link there. So the more recent and new projects, especially where we have the voluntary standards, these standards are available via the e-store. And for the international standards, I would have highlighted that we are a member of ISO, so the International Organization for Standardization. We have a customized store where you can acquire ISO standards and publications. So this makes access to standards a lot easier, although we do still maintain on request print copies of standards. So this is the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing at this point. And I would like to turn the session over to Ms. Kimberly, directly responsible for these 2 standards. And in terms of Kimberly's background, and just very quickly, she has been in the standardization division for over 9 years, and she has been working on a number of very important standards, such as the electrical wiring code. And we now have several parts of the code covering low voltage, high voltage, renewable energy systems, and electric vehicle chargers. So she has also worked on standards for, as we would see today, lighting products, in electrical and computer engineering from the university. So with that brief background, I'll turn it over to Kimberly to give us the overview of these two very important compulsory standards. Kimberly,
Thank you, Nadita. Confirming you all can hear and see my presentation.
confirm.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm here today, as Nadita would have said, to talk about these two standards that we have for public comment. So they are PCTTCS 23, which speaks to electrical accessories and components compulsory requirements, and PCTTCS 25, which speaks to electrical lighting products compulsory requirements. As stated in the titles, both of these standards are compulsory standards, so they will be enforced by the TTBS. Excuse me. So I'll begin with the PCTTS 23. So all this really says is public comment, Trinidad and Tobago compulsory standard. So that's why we have those letters before the number. But essentially, when it's a standard, it will become TTCS. So you might hear me saying TTCS along the way. So it's the same thing, just which stage it's at. So what is it? It's a national standard that specifies the safety requirements for all electrical accessories and components for use in Trinidad and Tobago. It's intended to be used with the most recent versions of internationally accepted standards, including those developed by UL and IEC, which you all will be familiar with. It was modeled after TTCS 24, which is for electrical appliances. And you all may be familiar with this standard. It was recently published, and we would have had a consultation, I think, almost exactly a year ago. So who's responsible for the development of this standard? As it's a compulsory standard, the Advisory Committee for Electrical Appliances would have consisted internal divisions of the TTBS. So the Conformity Assessment Divisions would have comprised this committee, which would be Implementation, Representatives, Certification, Lab Services Division, and Standardization Division. So we all would have come together and met on these standards and come up with the requirements. And as I said, yes, it's the Advisory Committee for Electrical Appliances. So the history of this is we would have gotten together to revise the electrical appliances standard. And we decided that this standard would have encompassed all of these items previously, electrical accessories and components. So we wanted to split it up a little further to make it easier, because some things may have different requirements than electrical appliances. So we compiled a list and we used TTCS 24, which is for electrical appliances, as the pilot project. And we used the first standard. This is the first standard of its format to reference the international standards via a dynamic table in the annex, which means that it references all of the product standards for washing machines, microwaves, etc., all the electrical appliances in a table that we can control at TTBS. So the standard can technically be updated without actually going through the process of updating. So as the implementation sees fit to add any international standards to the list, it can be updated on the website. So we use that model as the pilot project, and we model these TTCS 23 and 25 similar to that one. So these two are very similar, however, they deal with different things. So one deals with electrical accessories and components, and one deals with all the lighting products. So the content of accessories and components includes the scope, the normative references, the terms and definition, general requirements, specific requirements for electrical accessories and components, conflict with other national standards, mechanisms to demonstrate compliance, and measures related to non-compliance. And then we have the normative annex, which includes that table I was just telling you about. So the scope of PCTTCS 23. This specifies the safety requirement for electrical accessories and components used in Trinidad and Tobago. It also specifies labeling information to be placed on the electrical accessories and components, as well as the information to be placed on the packaging. So not just the component itself, the packaging as well. And this standard applies to electrical accessories and components intended to be used at the nominal supply voltages of Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, 115 to 30 volts. So it does not cover electrical accessories designed exclusively for industrial purposes or intended to be used in corrosive or explosive environments. It also doesn't cover lighting products, nor does it cover the electrical appliances, as I would have said, because those have their own standards. So the normative reference, as I mentioned previously, that table would include all of the standards that we have referenced internationally, and you can get a little snapshot of it here. This is what it looks like when you go to that website. And here we have the type of electrical accessory and the specific standards that are applicable. And these will be updated to include new standards as necessary. So for the terms and definitions, we would have included some terms and definitions throughout the suite of labeling standards throughout TTBS. We have begun the harmonization process, and we are trying to have the same terms being used in all of the standards so that it's understood and there's no discrepancy there. So one of the terms we introduced is conformity assessment, which is the demonstration that specified the requirements relating to a product, a process, system, person, or body are fulfilled. Distributor, a person or entity that supplies businesses with goods. Manufacturer, a person or entity who produces, processes, prepares, packages, or prepackages any goods for sale. Some other definitions we included are electrical accessory, which is an item in domestic and industrial electrical wiring. Electric component, which is self-contained element intended to store, generate, distribute, alter, or consume electrical energy or effect an electrical junction. So this term you would have previously seen in the TTCS 24 electrical appliances, if you're familiar with that standard. We're trying to introduce these terms in all of our labeling standards to deal with all of the items which have been either rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, remanufactured, renewed. We know in the industry, these terms may be slightly different. I have different little nuances between them, or among them, I should say. However, the way we deal with them in our conformity assessment is they are all dealt with the same way, regardless of whether it was rebuilt or reconditioned. The conformity assessment scheme is the same. So we have included all of them here because that's how we see it, even though they may have separate distinctions. So they are goods which have been overhauled, repaired, refitted, or have undergone a similar process to be made reusable to meet applicable technical standards or regulatory requirements. Similarly here, secondhand goods and used goods, goods or components which have been in service and that are re-entering a market for sale. So let's move on to the general labeling. So just before I begin here, most of the content, the general content, may be similar for the TTCS 2025, which is the lighting product standards. So I'll only go through it once. I'll flip through it at the end, but I wouldn't be going in depth. So listen carefully now. So the general labeling, the name of the manufacturer, distributor, importer, retailer responsible. All this information has to be placed on the product itself. The address, the country of origin, the model number, serial number, where applicable, indication of whether it was rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, etc. The nature of the voltage supply, the rated voltage, the rated current, certification mark, hazard warning. So the caution markings are as specified. They intended to inform the user of a potential risk, and they shall be in accordance with ISO 7010. And where applicable, the caution markings intended to instruct the user shall be legible and visible from the position at which it presents maximum risk to exposure. So the presentation of information. The labeling information shall be clear and legible, and all statements shall be at minimum in the English language. What this means is you must have the English language. Other languages can be present, but you must have the English language. And letter symbols, graphics, and numeric symbols may be used. If the letter symbols are used, they shall be in accordance with IEC 60027. And the graphics shall be in accordance with ISO 7000 or IEC 60417. So the labeling for the packaging. The functionality of the electrical accessory or component shall be written, brief description of the product and the conditions for operations, special handling instructions, and indication of whether it was reconditioned, remanufactured, or refurbished. So yes, this has to be repeated on the packaging as well. The specific requirement for electrical accessories and components. So these products shall comply with a standard that is recognized by the TTBS as outlined in Annex A, which is that table that I would have showed you before. It is available at gottbs.com/EAAC-standards list. That's short for electrical accessories and components. So the list is constantly updated to include new standards recognized by TTBS. And in the event that the electrical accessory is not covered, then it will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And we'll see in 7.1.2 shortly. And electrical accessories considered e-waste under the Basel Convention and national legislation shall not enter into the local market. So where there is a conflict between the requirements of this standard and any other compulsory national standard covering the same products or category, the standard containing the more specific requirements shall take precedence. I think I have an example of this lower down, so I'll remember to show you all. Mechanisms to demonstrate compliance. So the way that this clause is split up is to address the new electrical accessories and components, and then other than new, which would be rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, remanufactured, including used and secondhand. So for the new accessories and components, the locally manufactured and imported accessories and components shall conform with the requirements stated in clause 4, 5, and 6 of the standard, and it shall be subject to a mandatory conformity assessment program administered by TTBS. TTBS may consider and accept information from other sources such as third-party testing, product certification, and/or quality management system certification from an accredited body. And also electrical accessories and components shall be functionally compatible with our local low voltage wiring code, as well as our high voltage wiring code, meaning all of our wiring codes. So in the event that the accessory or component has a product certification mark, the mark shall be genuine, and both the mark and the associated standard shall be submitted to TTBS for approval. And TTBS reserves the right to test any electrical or accessory or components for compliance to the standard. And all documentation shall be in the English language. So for the products other than new, which includes that whole re section and the used and secondhand section, it means the entire lot of the imported items or the produced items here shall be evaluated or assessed by TTBS at the expense of the manufacturer, distributor, importer, retailer. And when necessary, where they are subject to further sampling and testing, it will be done at the expense of the previously mentioned parties responsible. And all electrical and components categorized as used or secondhand shall be subject to 100% testing. And again, all documentation shall be in the English language. We thought we needed to repeat it for each section just to ensure that everything is in the English language. So these are the measures related to non-compliance, where electrical accessories and components under the scope of the standard are found to be in non-compliance of any of the requirements. TTBS can initiate any of the following actions. We can direct the manufacturer or person responsible to remove the non-conforming products from the market. We can direct the seizure, detention, or disposal, prohibit the sale, permit modifications as necessary for compliance, and any action permitted by the latest version of the Standards Act, Chapter 8203. And any breaches of the standard are subject to fines and penalties. So look out for that. So as I said, TTCS 25 was modeled similarly to TTCS 23, which were both modeled as against the TTCS 24 electrical appliances. So what is TTCS 25? This standard specifies a safety requirement for all electrical lighting products for use in TNT. It's intended, again, to be used with the most recent versions of internationally accepted standards, including UL and IEC standards. So similarly, who's responsible? The same committee that worked on appliances, it worked on the lighting products, as well as the accessories and components. The scope is exactly the same, but we have different subscopes in between. So this scope specifies the safety requirements for all electrical lighting products for use in Trinidad and Tobago, including but not limited to fluorescent lamps, tungsten filament lamps, LEDs, seasonal and holiday decorative products, and luminaires. It also specifies the labeling information to be placed on the products and the packaging. It applies to lighting products, sorry, that's a typo there. It applies to lighting products intended for use at either of the nominal voltages of Trinidad and Tobago, 115 and 230 volts. It does not apply to electrical lighting designed for industrial purposes or to be used in corrosive or explosive environments. It also does not apply to electrical appliances, nor does it apply to accessories or components. Similarly, the normative reference, this has its own table as well in the normative annex that can be found on the website, ELP, Electrical Lighting Products -Standards List. And this is a snapshot of what it looks like. You can see all the international standards referenced there, UL 935, TTCS 11, UL 1598, etc. Terms and definition, as I said, the conformity assessment, distributor, manufacturer, we wanted to harmonize all of these labeling standards so they all are speaking toward the same thing. Electrical lighting product. So this means that it's an electrical lamp that provides illumination. And the luminaire, complete lighting consisting of a lamp or lamps together with the parts designed to distribute lights, to position and protect the lamps and ballast where applicable, and to connect the lamps to the power supply. Similarly, rebuild, refurbish, recondition, we have all of this defined in this standard as well. Similarly, secondhand goods, used goods. So the labeling here is slightly different because there are less requirements as their lighting products. So these are the requirements that apply for all of the lighting products except tungsten filament lamps. Those are a kind of difficult case because those lamps are physically constrained by how much information can fit on those tungsten filament lamps. So that's in a separate clause below, you'll see. So for the general labeling for everything except tungsten filament, the name of the manufacturer, the address, country of origin, model number, indication of whether it's rebuilt, reconditioned, refurbished, remanufactured, rated voltage, a certification mark, and hazard warning. So for CFLs and LEDs, we have additional labeling which needs to be marked on the CFLs and LEDs in addition to what was previously stated. So the light color, color temperature, the color rendering index, the cap type, frequency, indication of dimmability where necessary, and indication of whether it's rated for use in enclosures. We also have the performance requirements of the compact fluorescent lamps and lighting and diode lamps, stating that they shall comply with the requirements as specified in TTCS 11. So what is TTCS 11? That's another compulsory standard for energy labeling of CFLs and LEDs. This was published, I believe, in 2019. I could be wrong, around there, probably about 3 years ago. And so all of these requirements are stated in TTCS 11. the efficacy, safety, CRI, power factor, harmonic distortion, lumen maintenance, start time, run-up time, switching cycles, premature failure rates, and rated life. So you'll have to go to TTCS 11. It's a freely available compulsory standard from the TTBS website. Because it's a compulsory standard, it's free. So you can go and you can collect it and see the requirements listed there as to what the CFLs and LEDs need to conform to. So the energy labeling requirements would also be found in the TTCS 11. So when I spoke about the conflict of standards previously in that clause, this is an example of such conflict. So this standard, the TTCS 25, covers electrical lighting products. TTCS 11 covers specifically energy labeling requirements for CFLs and LEDs. So that is a more specific standard which covers the CFLs and LEDs directly. So anything I state here in this standard that's outside of the restrictions or the requirements, listed in TTCS 11, it would be moot because TTCS 11 would hold precedence over the standard. So essentially, you have to conform to TTCS 11. We are just restating it here so that you can have one document to try to collate everything easily here. However, you still have to reference it for the specific notes, but at least you have an idea of what you have to conform with. So for tungsten filament lamps, the labeling to be on the lamp itself, just three things: the name of the manufacturer, rated voltage, rated wattage. All of the previous information that were on the products itself for the other items will have to be on the sleeve or the packaging of the tungsten filament lamps, which should include the name of manufacturer, address, country of origin, rated voltage, wattage, cap type, rated life, rated luminous flux, and the finish of the bulb. So as I said, I would have gone through all of this already, so I'm just gonna scroll through. It has to have the quotient markings as necessary. Presentation of information is the same, English language. All the graphics and symbols have to be in accordance with the relevant IEC standards. The packaging is the same. And the specific requirements here is a similar statement. Products shall comply with the standard that's recognized by TTBS as outlined in Annex A of this standard. And the list is constantly updated, as I said. And then these products, if they are not covered by the list, shall be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Again, lighting products considered e-waste under the Basel Convention and national legislation shall not enter into the local market. So conflict clause again, where there's a conflict, the standard covering the same product category of products, the standard containing the more specific requirements shall take precedence. So the same way that the previous standard was separated into new electrical products and other than new for the regulations, it's the same thing here for compliance. So new lighting products shall comply with the requirements stated in this standard. TTBS shall verify compliance to this standard, and the lighting products under the scope of this standard shall be subject to a mandatory conformity assessment program by TTBS. TTBS may consider and accept information from other sources, third-party testing, product certification, or quality management system certification. And it shall be compatible with our local wiring codes. In the event that the product has a certification mark, both the mark and the associated standard shall be submitted for approval by TTBS. And TTBS reserves the right to sample and test any lighting product for compliance to this standard. All documentation shall be in the English language. We can't say that enough. So for other than new, similarly to the previous standard, the entire lot shall be evaluated and assessed at the expense of the manufacturer, distributor, importer. And where necessary, the categories of electrical lighting products to be further tested, it shall be done at the expense of the previously stated responsible bodies. And all categorized as used or secondhand are subjected to 100% testing for compliance. Measures related to non-compliance are the same. If something is found to be in breach of them, TTBS has the power to initiate any of the following actions. So let me just highlight the reason for the approach of these two standards. Previously, if we had 8 of those standards, product standards, listed in red as national standards, this one standard being created would have replaced 8 national standards. If we had to go through each standard and revise and publish each standard, it would have taken years. It could have, the fastest it could have been done is probably 2 or 3 years, I would say. So this way we are able to update 8 standards in one standard. And we have also introduced references to 6 new international standards listed in green. Similarly, for the electrical lighting products, it replaces 4 national compulsory standards, and it also has the reference to TTCS 11. So at this point in our standards development process, we are required by the Standards Act to put out these standards for public comment in our 3 daily national newspapers. We weren't able to get them advertised before this consultation, but they will be advertised on the 10th, 11th, and 12th of July, respectively. So you can look out for those. However, they have been placed on our TTBS website for public comment. So you can visit our website and you can see the drafts, you can review them, and there's also a link to submit any comments you may have on them, which will help us in our standards development process. So you'll get your chance to weigh in on your thoughts on the requirements. We also issued the WTO notification yesterday, 4th of July. And today we are having the stakeholder consultation, and all of these things are done to solicit feedback from you all and include you in the process of revising these standards. So how to comment, as I just said, we have the draft, which can be viewed at gottbs.com. If you want a direct link, tinyurl.com/electproducts-comment. And the public comment period ends tentatively around the 15th of September. You'll see the closing date on the ads when they are advertised. So this is an average of the date it should be. Or you can send me a comment directly to my email, it's listed below, and I'll upload my presentation along with the other presentations on the website, and we'll email you a link. And that's it for me. So thank you all for listening, and I'll turn you back over to Nadita.
Thank you, Kimberly, for giving us the overview of the 2 proposed compulsory standards. And we will have the question and answer session. So I'm sure that there will be some queries from our stakeholders today. So I ask that you hold until we have completed our presentation. So next we have Ms. Nadine Jeffrey, and she is from the Electrical Products Lab. She has been the officer in charge for 18 years, and she has worked in a number of organizations, specifically in the engineering field. So I would turn the session over to Ms. Jeffrey to deliver her presentation. So Nadine, the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much. I am glad to present to you at this time. Just give me one. Right. I am glad to present to you on this consultation for these 2 draft standards. My name is Nadine Jeffrey. I am the officer in charge to the Electrical Products Lab under the Laboratory Services Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. So I would like to tell you today a little about the overview of the key testing requirements which are applicable to the electrical accessories and components standard PCTTCS 23 up for public comment, as well as the electrical lighting products PCTTCS 25, as well as what the laboratory services does. So let me just go back a little bit. Sorry about that. The laboratory services hosts 4 labs in 4 disciplines of chemicals, of fibers. This refers to textiles and papers. And they do a lot of work for personal protective equipment, like safety boots, slings, etc. We also have the lab in the discipline of working on materials, which covers metals, paints, and the plastics. And then electrical, which applies directly to the standards we are looking at today. So what the laboratory does, we assess labeling, and there are good reasons for doing that because they are supposed to meet standard requirements and they're supposed to have effective customer information. We provide consultancy as well, and we have a wide range of knowledge based on many years of testing of items. We also provide advice to organizations, which is not limited or restricted to the tests that we perform, because we can provide the research that would apply to the incumbents, to the client's particular situation. So we provide these as well as the physical testing. And with the physical testing, we determine the performance of the particular item, that it works as it should work. We test for safety to identify that the item does not cause damage to consumers or employers. And also we do identification, which is particularly used for chemicals, metals, and alloys, and their percentages in their particular alloys or chemicals. The picture there refers to glove testing, which is done in the electrical products lab for the PPE, for electrical insulating gloves. We also perform that. So as we go back to what the lab does, we are also going to look at the labeling that it does. Right? Labels and tags are critical. But usually people would think the physical test is important. You have the item, you're dealing with that, and that is what you want. But the labels and tags are very important. So, as identified by Kimberly before, I'm not going to go through as much detail as she did, but the information is supposed to be indelible, durable, legible, conspicuous. And not everyone understands this when they're looking at information. Indelible, it must not be removed easily by sweaty hands, by rubbing on clothes, or any everyday activities. It's supposed to remain. The lettering is supposed to remain. And durable. So the label that is on any item is supposed to not peel, crack, flake, or have any of other conditions that would make it unavailable, unreadable, not present. Legible, in terms of being legible, this refers to the font size on labels. Sometimes you get labels which are very small. It is not practical for people to read the content, but that is not acceptable because that is not legible. It's supposed to not have a background color which is too similar with the lettering, or conflicts and clashes with the lettering and causes problems to see. And it's supposed to be conspicuous. So the information that a person needs for an item is supposed to be readily seen, not having to flip open things, compartments to find out what this labeling is about, what the information is. In addition to that, labeling routinely is supposed to be on the item. Of course, there is also requirements for labeling on the package. And as Kimberly repeated, and is repeated many times in the standard, it must be in the English language. Graphical symbols are accessible and advised as well. In addition to that, I'll go through it a little quickly since Kimberly went through a lot of it. The identification must have the description, model number, serial number where applicable. Not everything requires a serial number. The source of the item, the company name, brand name, distributor, country of origin, as well as address is needed to be there. And here we have a picture of one of the electrical components, an adapter, charger, a charging adapter, which works for cell phones and for so many other things. This standard will be covering all of that. Some of the other conditions for labeling is the electrical rating. We definitely need electrical rating of the items, whether it's AC, DC, or a mixture. The value of the voltage, the current expected, and the frequency used whenever it's AC. And I'm just going to go through quickly caution markings, which were identified when Kimberly were going through. The markings must be written or graphical, and you must have caution, warning, or danger on it. And we continue to, if there are outlets on the appliance, on the accessory, there must be a statement identifying the output voltage and current, and if the grounding is applicable. So the last thing is that the packaging needs to have information for the consumer, because that is the first interaction that the consumer needs to identify what they want and what the item will provide. So of course, packaging, even though it's temporary, it is necessary. And as we continue to the other conditions that are needed, there, we went to that already. I'll talk about the physical part of the testing in the labs after going through labels. So the laboratories of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards are accredited for particular tests. Now, accreditation means that an external organization has assessed us to identify if we are performing our testing to the required international conditions. And we have gone through this process. We have been accredited for, I believe, 21 years. We have gone through this process of maintaining very high international standards of our test processes. So tests on the electrical accessories and electrical lighting products are not presently accredited, but all our work is performed consistently to the accreditation process. So according to the ISO 17025-2017 standard, all of our testing follows the documentation requirements. They follow the processes. They follow the reviews, which includes audits, follows the non-conforming non-conforming investigations for when any items outside of the required conditions are identified, follows assessment of the risks, and so many more applications. So for the physical tests, we assess and determine, first of all, what standards are applicable to the particular item we're looking at, whether it is a CFL bulb for the lighting products, or whether it is an extension cord or a plug-in cord under the electrical components, or the other items that would apply to those standards. First, we check for the standard applicable to it. After that, we look at the safety tests as identified before, and these are not all of the safety tests that are applicable. And we will not always be doing all the tests that are required, but we would check for safety. We would check for performance. After that, in addition to that, we make sure that the persons performing the tests are assessed as competent for those particular tests. And it is only after they are competent on spare items can they test your items. We're not putting your items through the practice. We also perform intra-lab comparisons to identify that everyone performing a test is doing it consistently, following the processes and getting consistently relevant results as well, so that all the items coming in of a similar type would be undergoing the same type of process, no matter who is doing it, whether it's an accredited test or not an accredited test. It would still be the same process. And we would also make sure that our equipment fits under the requirements as well. So we check our equipment, that they are reliable, that the results are repeatable and consistent. We make sure that our equipment is calibrated. Calibration means that it is assessed to the external international SI standards and measurements. So our equipment performing a test for you will give the same results as a calibrated equipment in Europe, in Africa, in North America, because it's all traceable to the same standards. So that is how our physical tests are performed. And when we have completed our tests, the main reason is that you are safe. Okay, so now it's on to you. The items in your possession are now up to you to determine that you use it safely. No damaging connections, please. But use safety first. A lot of the risks, however, do not come with this safety sign, but there are caution warnings. Take note of them. So in your possession, do not use to damage electrical items. There should be no cracks, broken insulation on any of your items. Notice if they have or make additional sounds, and they should never be shooting sparks. In addition to that, you need to be responsible to have safe installation of all of your items by a reputable, trained personnel. So it is your responsibility that all of your installations are safe. And when you use your items, you also use them safely. So at this point in time, I would like to say for the PCTTCS 23, Electrical Accessories and Components Public Comment Standard, and for the PCTTCS 25, Electrical Lighting Products Standard, that your participation is very important, vitally important to implement these standards. We cannot do it without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine, for giving us that comprehensive review of the services available from the Electrical Products Lab at TTBS and also some of the key safety considerations. I would now like to turn the session over to Mr. Irvin Buchun, and I'll just give a brief introduction to Mr. Buchun. So Irvin has been a certified quality inspector, and he's part of the implementation division for over 10 years. He holds a diploma in electrical installations, as well as other very important certificates in the area of air conditioning and refrigeration. He is a part of the enforcement team who are responsible for ensuring compliance to the compulsory standards in the area of electrical appliances, components, accessories, lighting, and he has also been involved in anti-counterfeiting and illicit trade regulation. So I turn the session over to Irvin to go through the inspection process that TTBS would normally use.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to confirm that you hear me fine and see my presentation.
Confirmed. Yes, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, observing all protocols, good morning again all. So today I'm presenting on the inspection process for electrical goods as it relates to this meeting, right? So the implementation division, as mentioned before, is the conformity assessment arm of the TTBS responsible for the implementation of compulsory standards for the preservation of safety and health of consumers and the environment. Now, this is achieved through inspections, market surveillance, compliance management, and the overall monitoring of products, practices, and services for all goods, with the exception of, as mentioned before, food, drugs, cosmetics, and medical items. The division is also actively involved with consultation and public education in the context of engagement mainstreaming. All right, so the authority of the inspection body is derived from Act of Parliament, Chapter 8203, called the Standards Act, and the regulations made therein. And this is just to outline briefly some of the sections of the Act which enables fees, powers to inspect, seize, make recalls, etc., and the summary offenses, and of course, confidentiality, which is very important. All right, as mentioned, the division is also accredited to ISO IC 17020 of 2012, and this outlines requirements for the operations of various types of inspection bodies and provides confidence that the conformity assessment process is competent, impartial, and also consistent. All right, so a little bit about the inspection process in general. So as many of you may know, the Appliance and Safety Products subunit of the Implementation Division is responsible for the inspection of electrical goods. Regarding goods produced outside of TNT, the process in its current dispensation commences at the point of import with the screening of customs entries via the single electronic window called TT-BizLink. Now, at this point, it is crucial that importers provide the necessary documentation, such as invoices, certificates, letters, etc., for the processing of the import declaration. Overall, a risk-based approach is taken regarding the level and location of inspection. That is, like for high-risk goods, they are examined at the ports of entry or the cess stations or the customs bonded areas. Medium risk items are held for inspection at the premises, and here it is critical that importers provide contact information or directly contact TTBS to arrange the inspection when the goods are received and are available. Now, the lower risk items are provisionally released to be monitored through market surveillance or via the remote inspection program called the RVI program. All right, and regarding the inspection process itself, so the item inspection typically begins with ID verification, and then the cross-referencing of the goods presented with the import documents, following which the labels are then assessed. So where applicable, samples are taken as evidence or to verify certifications as described before. And sampling is also done to verify documentation in the case of refurbished, recertified, etc., or even for further assessment and testing by the TTBS laboratory or external lab. Right, so testing is allowed for items without acceptable certification marks, or in some cases, the submission of third-party test documents from an accredited body would be permissible. Where label or item modifications are required, this would be verified through reinspection, and if conformance is achieved, then all the necessary releases would be granted for the items, right? If, however, conformance cannot be achieved, items would be destroyed or reshipped to the origin point in accordance with local statutes as guided by relevant authorities such as the EMA and so on, right? At any point, importers or proprietors can also reserve the right to appeal the inspection decisions via our complaints and appeals portal found online on the TTBS website. Again, a point to note again, as previous speakers mentioned, locally manufactured goods, which are not so common for these types of products, but they would follow a product certification process as directed by TTBS. All right, so another common question that comes up all the time is, what are the acceptable certification marks to TTBS, right? So this is a non-exhaustive list of some of the certification marks that we commonly interface and would allow. Right. So as we see, like the NOM, the 3Cs, TUV, UL, and so on. So all of these will be acceptable, right? This is just some of the features of the marks in more details. All right, so this one is the ETL, TUV, SUD, GS. All right, sometimes you find them in combination with other marks as well. And this is the other TUV, right, non-mark. All right, now these marks are not accepted as they do not relate to the type of safety requirements covered by the standards in the case of the FCC and the ROHS. And CE, since it is not the type of certification scheme acceptable for products in our region. I think the main point here is that it's absolutely critical that any mark presented on items be authentic and genuine, right? Which is backed up by the clauses in the standard as well. And note also that new marks are always being considered via the relevant diligence processes. So to give you an example, recently we've seen the MET mark being displayed in place of some of the other popular ones, right? So, right, and finally on the inspection process regarding used electrical items, and I stressed on the word used to denote alignment to the definitions given by the standard, right? So these would undergo additional safety checks with a portable appliance tester or the PAT as seen on the screen on top there in the other picture. And basically this would verify the electrical integrity of the devices, right? And as mentioned before too, it will be done on the entire lot, right? A 100% sampling plan. Some of the tests would include inter alia, bonding, insulation resistance, leakage, and unsighted items can also be sent to TTBS or external labs for follow-up as necessary, right? So we see the TTBS lighting lab below. So on the point of CAPA, this table summarizes some of the common non-conformances and the corresponding actions typically taken as outlined in the Standards Act and the clauses of the compulsory standards, right? So to reiterate, label deficiencies shall be corrected via relabeling and verification, but the lack of a certification mark triggers further review and testing. Again, if non-conformances cannot be corrected, then items would not be permitted to the market, and where applicable, recalls would be instituted on other mechanisms as previously outlined. false safety or certification marks, or overall just counterfeited items in general, on the other hand, they present a very grave situation. This would be exacted by the seizure or quarantine, then reshipping or destruction of these items at cost to the proprietor. On the same point, trade advisories are sometimes typically done, as we saw recently with the safety matches issued. And often these exercises are conducted with the assistance of anti-illicit trade task groups, such as the multi-agency task force, as necessary. All right, with the part testing, a common test deficiency is failure the input test, which is a misalignment of the ratings basically. And up to a tolerance limit, relabeling will typically be allowed here in some cases. All right, also failure of the earth is quite common, which will require repair and retesting. What we would like to encourage, however, is a proactive approach. This should be taken to prevent shipment of non-conforming items to our waters, right, or manufactured locally where applicable, right, as we spoke about e-waste and things like that. So this would be achieved via the pre-assessment of representative samples. And of course, this would prevent a lot of the setbacks associated with non-conformances, and again, very, very strongly recommend. So I would close by providing a brief overview of what is expected for the rollout of the standards. So following the publication of the compulsory standards order as required in law, a subsequent engagement would be conducted, which would table the timelines and phases for enforcement, the moratoria periods, and so on. A snapshot survey will examine alignment of market and import data with the standard requirements, which would in turn drive the conformity assessment protocols in a risk-based and pragmatic manner. The process would thus incorporate feedback so we could ensure continuous improvement in the facilitation of safe and fair trade. Right, and well, as expected, the details of the inspection regime, the associated fees and penalties, and the compliance procedure would be designated at that point, bearing in mind that the various product categories that we've been discussing today falls within compulsory standards at present, and the substantive inspection or conformity assessment processes will continue until the new ones are rolled out. All right, so I thank you for your attention today, and I will close by leaving contact information for the unit headed by Mr. Larry Gopichan, who unfortunately had a personal emergency today, so he could not be here. And queries related to illicit trade can be submitted to the email in the middle there. And finally, general implementation division concerns can be sent to the implementation address. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A segment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Irvin, for giving us that overview of the inspection process and highlighting some of the common issues that we see with regard to the enforcement of the compulsory standards for electrical goods. So without further ado, we will move straight into the Q&A session, and I invite persons to either place their questions in the chat or raise their hand and we can take them verbally. So we will start off the session with a question from Ms. Eva Bullard. And her question is, why are the voltages being stated in 115/230 volts instead of 110/220? Is there a difference? So I will invite Ms. Badlow to give us a response to that.
Hi, good day again. So Ms. Bullard, the voltages stated by TNTech on their wiring for light and power is qualified as 115 or 230 volts. So the tolerance, I believe, is 6%. So it's either 115 plus or minus 6%. So that would range from about 108 to 121 volts. So people might you might hear the term 120 or 110 because that falls within the range of what is being provided. But what is actually provided is 115 volts plus or minus a tolerance of 6%. Same for the 230. So that would also be subject to the 6% tolerance, which would make it from 216 roughly to 243 or 44. Yeah, around there. So that's the answer for the first question, yes. I see the second one is, how do we know that e-waste is not coming into the country labeled as refurbished? So the fact is we don't. People can try to manipulate the system to accommodate their own needs. However, those products are subject to testing. And usually if we see something suspicious, I can let Irvin answer after this because he's the one who would be dealing with these situations. But once the product is tested and it fails the test, then it has to be returned, or we will find some means of disposal. So either we wouldn't accept it into the country. So anything that doesn't pass our tests will be returned. So Irvin, you want to weigh in here on the refurbished and reconditioned as waste?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Kimberly is absolutely right. I could outline the process a little bit. So essentially, first, before the shipment would be even admitted, the documentary checks will allow, in most cases, for the uncovering of anything untoward. So a lot of the times, if people are trying to do that intentionally, they will take ways and means, and it will be very difficult. But in most cases, the documents would not align properly. As well, what would happen is on a case-by-case basis, we would liaise with the inquiry point for the Basel Convention through the EMA, who through their networks, international networks, would be able to reach out to their contacts and stuff like that. So there's a process to follow. In terms of how it is treated, it will really be on a case-by-case basis, because after the goods get here, sending it back to another country may not always be the best situation. But of course, there will be overall penalties to be faced by the perpetrators. But yeah, in most cases, we will be able to, after we do our diligence, actually realize what was the case and treat it accordingly.
Thank you, Kimberly and Irvin. So I would invite persons, if they have any major questions, they can raise their hands and ask the question live, or we can take the questions in the chats and direct it to the presenters. So at this time, I'm not seeing any hands being raised. Okay, so we have a question from Mr. Wazir Mohammed, and it says your inspection department has been understaffed for a few years now, and has this been improved? And Mr. Mohammed, I will not pose this question to the presenters, but we do have our executive director here, Mr. Jose Trejo, who would have delivered the opening remarks previously. So we will note the comment, and if there's any further discussion on this matter, we will reach out to you. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, and it's something that TTBS will review with the management team. So if there are any comments on the technical requirements, perhaps, Kimberly, what you can do is pull up the draft standards so that we can show the location and highlight any critical elements. So in the meanwhile, if there are any technical issues with the proposed draft standards, please let us know. And in terms of the approach that we have taken, you would see, and Kimberly would have highlighted, that we have consolidated a lot of the existing product standards that we would have adopted either from UL or IEC in the past. So our attempt here is to make the system more harmonized and consolidate the critical requirements as far as possible, and using some of the undated reference. So Kimberly, if you just want to highlight in more detail some of the reference standards.
Sure. So for the accessories and components, oh, sorry, can you all hear me? Just confirming.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. So for the accessories and components, we have the categories listed on the left. Attachment plugs and receptacles will conform to UL 498, attachment plugs and receptacles. Circuit breakers, we have UL 489, molded case circuit breakers. We also have UL 1449, surge protective devices, IEC 60947-2, low voltage switch gear and control gear, and IEC 61643 series, low voltage surge protective devices. So this is a host of standards. I couldn't list all of them here, so I just put the entire series. For class 2 power units, there's UL 1310, cord sets and power supply cords, UL 817, cord sets and power supply cords. We also have the IEC equivalent, which is IEC 60799, electrical accessories. Also IEC 60884-2-7, plugs and socket outlets for household and similar purposes. Then we have general use snap switches, UL 20, GFCIs, UL 943, power taps, UL 1363, and power units other than class 2 in UL 1012. And we have UPS standards. We have the UL standard 1778 and the IEC standards, the 62040 series. So let me just share the lighting standard. For the lighting standard, we have just a few, but it captures the fluorescent lamp ballast, UL 935, LEDs, which would be captured in our local compulsory standard TTCS 11, energy labeling, CFLs and LEDs. Luminaires captured in UL 1598, IEC 60598-1. Seasonal and holiday decorative products. So UL 588 and IEC 60598-2-20, which is luminaires, lighting chains. And then we have the tungsten filament lamp references found in IEC 60064 and 60432-1. So those are all the standards we have essentially referenced, replaced, or newly referenced in this document to cover all of the products that are coming into the country. So I see there's a comment in the chat, Nadita.
Yes, Kimberly. So we have a question from Ms. Bollard again, and I will pass this over to Irvin to explain how we treat with non-genuine or counterfeit items. So the question is, how do we deal with non-genuine goods coming into the market? And is there some way to let the consumer know what to look for?
Hi, yes, thank you for the question. Yes, so I kind of delved briefly into some of the mechanisms that the Bureau will use to deal with counterfeit or non-genuine items. So the compliance procedure will kick into effect once the Bureau is aware and decides to take the necessary steps to deal with it, right? On a higher level, there are anti-illicit trade task groups, as I mentioned as well, which will involve all the relevant state agencies involved, right? So in some cases where it's an overall trademark issue, it may be a little bit outside of the jurisdiction of the TTPS, the Bureau standards, but other agencies like the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Customs and Excise Division, the Intellectual Property Office, through the Anti-Illicit Trade Task Force and other task groups like that, as I mentioned, will assist in that cases, right? So they will monitor international advisories where basically if there are any, prior notifications, so it will be on the lookout for it, as well as liaising with the necessary rights holders, which is really the action to be taken within our Trinidad and Tobago laws. So on that aspect, that's how we will monitor it. In terms of the consumer now, there are a few things that you could look out for to tell or just give you an idea if a good may not be genuine, right? So the first thing right off the bat might be price. What typically the prices might be for some of these genuine goods, especially the brand names. in my experience, the counterfeiters have gotten a little smart, especially unique to the Caribbean and the Trinidad and Tobago market. So now they're selling the counterfeits at similar to the authentic prices, which kind of, doesn't help in that case. Other things you can look for is just general quality and craftsmanship. You could tell sometimes just by looking or feeling the items. You could look for logos, stitching, things like that, as well as the packaging as well too. So you know that products may come in a specific type of packaging, and then you see something different. You may see it loose, not in a box or a bag at all, which will be also pieces of information that will be published, especially for the bigger brands on their websites, right? Specific to TTBS, however, as denoted in the Standards Act, certification marks. So if you would recall the slide that I showed before, false certification marks is a very serious issue. And what the TTBS will do from time to time is we will hold stakeholder consultations, we will put out articles online, we will put information on the website, and even in meetings like this, we will try to give some information, like for example, with the UL mark, what are the 4 things to look for, the word listed, UL in the circle, and so on. Of course, again, all of this information will be readily available online. A couple more points might be the source of the goods. Certain goods may have exclusive distributors. If you're an importer, you know that only certain distributors will have the permission to sell the items. So that's things to look for. And sometimes on the websites for the actual manufacturers, you could actually go up and look up serial numbers, model numbers, and stuff like that, right? In the case of test certificates, I know the question was about goods, but I can address the point one time. In the case of test certificates, what at the implementation division we've found is that sometimes importers will request test certificates from third party through the manufacturers. And sometimes they will be false. So even with that, there are processes that to be followed internally to TTBS, but even with your own diligence, you can go online and actually look up test report numbers and stuff like that. So I mean, it's a very complex issue, and we will treat with it on a case-by-case basis, but this is just some general information. So I hope I answered the question adequately.
Thank you, Evan. I just wanted to invite Kimberly to comment on the second part of the question as well. Is there some way to let the consumer know what to look for?
So maybe we can work with Consumer Affairs Division and come up with some e-flyers that can help consumers know. But generally, you would look for a certification mark, maybe. And as Evan was saying, if stuff is not found in the original packaging and stuff like that, those are just hints of what to look for. There's some people who may do such a good job in doing a counterfeit or making it look like an original product. So these things, they're just the preliminary checks that you can do on your own. Look for the certification marks and look for any other things that might help you identify whether or not this product may have been used before, it might be in circulation before. And if you do suspect that something might be off, you can always submit any queries to Consumer Affairs or TTBS as well if it's a quality issue. But I think that's something we can look into. We can work with Consumer Affairs Division, with our implementation division, as well as standardization, and come up with an e-flyer that can help let the consumers know what to look for. So that's a great idea. So we could probably look at that.
Hi,
I see
Nadine.
Nadine's.
Hello, good again, everyone. I hear repeatedly by Irvin and by Kimberly to look for the certification mark. But please, can you expand on if everything that is good is supposed to have a certification mark? And what about those that do not have certification marks? Are they all to be rejected?
Thanks, Nadine. So I will invite Irvin to just comment on how the existing enforcement system works at this point.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I mentioned it briefly, but I could go into it a little bit more. So as as denoted in the compulsory standards themselves, there is a specific clause which allows for the submission of third-party test documentation from an accredited institution. So in that case where a certification mark is not present on the item, then through the initial label inspection, that would be identified and that will trigger the next step of the process, which is the request for submission of test certificates and test reports specific to the items themselves to some sort of acceptable standard, which most likely would be in the table as we would have seen before, to be submitted and reviewed. And once it's authentic, then barring any other label modifications required, then the items would be released. You know, I could go ahead there a little bit more as well too, so I could talk about our experience with that. So again, as with the case of the importer, sometimes, as I was mentioning before as well, the manufacturers may submit documents which they or some other party may modify as the items being imported are not actually tested, right? So typically, sometimes we might see they may modify the model numbers, or they may submit a CE test certificate under the low voltage directive or maybe the CB scheme, but the electrical ratings do not align, the plugs and stuff don't align, so it's actually not the same item. So that's just some things to look out for the importers as well, but certificates are allowed definitely under the standard as well as the general inspection process for the implementation division for these types of items specifically.
I would like to just clarify my question. It was not particularly geared for dealing with importers, but the lady who asked the question previously, I believe it's Ms. Bollard, who I asked how to identify a good item. So on a consumer's position, she wouldn't have, or we, general public, would not have to be collecting a certificate, etc. But a consumer, would a consumer need to reject everything that does not have a mark?
Thank you, Nadine. I will invite Ms. Bullard to raise her comment directly. So Ms. Bullard, you could go ahead.
No, my question was answered. I understand where Ms. Jeffrey is coming from. We do get consumers coming here with questionable stuff, and we just want to make sure that we have some way to know, because we're not the experts where that is concerned. So I know that you'll made the offer to reach out. So I think that is something that we would have to collaborate with on a different level.
Thank you, Ms. Bullard.
We're close for time, but I just wanted to ask one question to Irvin.
Okay.
In terms of the reconditioned, the refurbished and stuff like that, who is it that when the goods come in here, it has to, from wherever the origin is, it has to be stamped, certified refurbished, certified reconditioned, or does TTBS do their own certification where that is concerned?
You're speaking specifically on the labeling components of that, right? Or the entire process?
Correct. So I don't know how, so you're
okay, sure, no problem. Yeah, okay, I get where you're coming from. Okay, so
right.
Yeah, so I mean, typically, if the item is certified refurbished by an accredited authorized third party, or even the first party, the manufacturer, you know, they will put some sort of label or have accompanying documentation, right? So for the importers, definitely that will be accessible. For the consumers, not so much, which is where the second part of the question, the process actually comes into play, where the TTBS or any other relevant agency will do the necessary documentary checks, one, and two, the actual physical checks, right? So that's the case of the recertified and stuff like that. In the case of just the used items, we will go the steps ahead, which will include the testing and stuff like that. Now, as required by the standards that we're discussing today, with the draft requirements, And even the previous standards, which we would have declared compulsory, and even previous versions of those said standards, like the appliances, labeling of the condition being refurbished or used or whatever it is mandatory. So in the cases where the items are not entered into the country in that state regarding the labeling, then the persons responsible will be required to apply those labels. So by the time it gets to the consumer will be informed, one, of the condition of the item, and two, that it has gone through the necessary conformity assessment process and is safe, right? Now, notwithstanding, it's Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of the times people may find ways to circumvent the proper regulatory process. But again, as I mentioned in some of my previous responses, that is where on a higher level, some of the anti-illicit trade mechanisms will come into play, as well as Nadita mentioned, the consumer complaints process, and as well as the public advisories, the flyers and things like that will have to overall inform consumers of how to spot with and how to treat with these situations.
Okay, Irvin, one more just now. So you're telling me that if something, I'm just giving you an example, I'm going to be quick. A fridge comes in certified, refurbished, or reconditioned. The standards that you're putting out is going to guide a layman like me as to what I can expect when a fridge comes in labeled refurbished, labeled reconditioned, and stuff like that. Am I correct?
Irvin, let me jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So Ms. Bollard, let me just go into some details here. If a fridge is classified as refurbished or reconditioned, it is still required that the product or the item complies with the compulsory requirements. And Kimberly would have highlighted those standards. So that is where the technical assessment from TTBS would come in, first starting with when the product comes in at the point of import and if it warrants any further investigation. So what we have seen is that normally the reconditioned, renewed items would come in with a limited warranty. But as TTBS, based on the compulsory standard, we expect that the safety and the functionality requirements be complied with. Now, from the consumer, on what we suggested before with the e-flyer and the promotional material, consumers need to be aware of when purchasing reconditioned, refurbished, there is a limited warranty. So I'm not sure if our society is paying attention to these details because the price point may be attractive. It may be much lower than a new item. So in terms of the awareness to consumers, they have to be aware that there is a limited warranty period in which the product will be available for any like returns or repairs or whatever the warranty covers. So I think that is a critical part. So I just wanted to recognize, so all the participants know that you're representing Consumer Affairs Division. So the consumer awareness and education component is very important because it is not something that we actively want to encourage. So the items that are used, refurbished, reconditioned, the price points may be very attractive, but there may be a limited performance and safety compliance at that point. So we would want to do the 100% inspection and testing, as Irvin would have highlighted, as well as Kimberly in the compliance clause. So that is something that in general consumers need to pay careful consideration in terms of products that are labeled or categorized as these things. And I wanted to go a little further in terms of what TTBS's mandate allows. So in terms of any product covered under the compulsory standard, if there's a complaint and is directed to us, we have the responsibility of investigating. But what frequently happens is that products that are in use are sometimes the subject of consumer complaints, which makes it very difficult for us to assess. So when we have the inspection process and we look at refurbished, reconditioned, special attention, and there is a significant safety component that we will have to assess in terms of ensuring that there's the compliance there. And this is where the responsibility is really on the importer or the person who puts the product out for sale. So it's a combination of awareness and it's a combination of what testing requirements are required. And I saw Mr. Trejo, you wanted to jump in here as well. So you could go ahead, Mr. Trejo.
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to see that Ms. Bullard is present here today. But I wanted to ask you, Ms. Bullard, and I'm assuming that the Act, the Consumer Protection Act, speaks to warranties. Does it specify a time frame? Because I think ideally what could happen here is that once the standards are introduced and are in effect, I think it'd be useful for, if it doesn't speak to reconditioned goods, if it doesn't speak to, I'm sure it does, but I don't know if there, what time limits is established in the Act that would say if it is a reconditioned good. You reference the standard that we would be established, and in your Act specify the time frame. I don't know. That's, as you said, we may need to have some further discussion so that there can be some synchronicity between your Act, your regulations, and the standards that we are establishing. But I'm happy for your question.
I am also as well. I'm glad I attended this session. I'm representing Ms. McIntyre, who is in another meeting. She's the director. Yes, the Trade Descriptions Act, and I think the Sale of Goods Act speaks to an implied warranty of merchantability for every product, whether it be a pen or a refrigerator. And we also have the suppliers coming on voluntarily and offering something like as a threshold requirement, warranties on goods and certain types of services. So there is that there. So that's why my question came to you all with respect to this whole standard on refurbished, reconditioned and all that, because I feel a floodgate is opening and it's scary because we want to be able to, at least if even it comes from a country of origin saying that it's certified, reconditioned or refurbished, that TTBS is also doing a further step. And in terms of your standards or that you're creating, there is something that defines it. And I know it will be difficult to define because it's different goods across a certain set of commodities. So it will be difficult for you to define each, but it must meet a certain basic standard. I'm assuming that is what you're putting out, so that when it comes to the market, we know that TTBS saw this and it conforms to the reconditioned or the refurbished or something. It would have been good also if TTBS would have put a further stamp to say that it was seen. But I know that is more work, and everywhere we are pressed for more staff. We have less staff and more staff issues. So I don't want to put that out there to give you all more headache, but it's just something that we're experiencing here in consumer affairs with issues with consumers. And I hope that this probably helps us more than hurts us.
Thank you, Ms. Bullard. Yeah, it's a discussion we had prior to having this stakeholder meeting. It's something that I raised as well with my team, because it might come across as if though we're opening up the market, but the reality is there are goods coming from various jurisdictions and that would probably can be flagged, and we have to have some means of verification, some means of ensuring that we can identify with it. So the technicalities of what you're asking is something that we will need to address. But again, thank you very much for your question.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem.
Okay, I'm not sure if Nadita has lost her connection, but I'm not seeing any other comments in the chat. Does anyone have any other comments or
Kimberly,
questions?
There was one more, so I got bumped off briefly, but did
That's
we
fine.
touch on Mr. Mohammed's question?
No, not yet.
So
You can go ahead.
Right, so he had asked, and this is primarily for Irvin, how long in advance does the TTBS require documents and test certificates for new items being imported?
Right. Okay. Thanks for the question. So we don't have a typical or a set time frame set in stone because the answer is really that it depends, right? It should really be as long in advance as required because the logistics of the shipping and importing and stuff like that it is really dependent on the importer side, right? Also as well too, it depends on the jurisdictions the testing laboratories are residing in. So sometimes the contact information is not readily available. So, I mean, as much in advance as is required, obviously it will be several months. Sometimes, just to give an example, within maybe a week or two, we could resolve the issues because the ease of communication with all the parties, even externally in Asia or wherever it is is there, but sometimes it may take longer than that because the back and forth, the language barriers and things like that. So overall, we would invite importers to give as much advance notice as possible in order to resolve that issues, especially not just for the test certificates, but even with the new certification marks where the diligence process will take a bit longer because there are more documents and stuff to review. So, I mean, I know I can answer the question in a roundabout way, but really and truly, it depends on, we just need as much advance notice as possible.
Thank you, Irvin. Okay, so I'm not seeing, okay, Mr. Trejo, you still have your hand up if you wanted to weigh in.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I think that I'm not so sure, but we didn't raise or didn't speak on the issue of regional initiatives. And I just wanted to speak on that briefly. I think in the past, there was a regional initiative to develop a rapid alert system. And they had titled CAREX, a lot of money spent under the European Development Fund to get this on track, and it would have involved all the consumer protection agencies in the region. But it would have served as a well-intended initiative, but it would have served as a kind of stopgap information exchange on a virtual platform where entities in each jurisdiction, whether it be a national standards body, whether it be a consumer protection agency, or even an economic operator, would be able to log on into that system to view goods circulating in the region, not only to view, but also to be able to post goods that have been flagged from other jurisdictions. So it was a well-intended exercise, and I don't know, Nadita, where we are regionally as it relates to that, but I think it was I know that most consumer protection agencies in the region would have been involved in this, and I think that it's unfortunate that it a lot of money went into it, and it really has not materialized, but it would have served in ensuring that we can speak to one another on a virtual platform. It would have assumed a lot of things in terms of the capabilities, existing capabilities in the region, to be able to flag goods and to be able to post goods that are defective, post goods that are misrepresenting in terms of the labeling, what have you. But even to the items that we speak to here of refurbished goods and so on. But I just thought that I would make mention of that because it's worth for us as a country as well to understand that yes, we have our national challenges, as Ms. Bullard just indicated. We're strapped for resources, and so it's good to have these other tools and instruments that can help mitigate, prevent, as a first line of measure. But anyways, I just thought I would mention that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Trejo, I will just cover a couple of points. So in terms of the CAREX, we can take up that discussion again with the Consumer Affairs Division. So today we have both Ms. Bullard and Mr. Jatan from Consumer Affairs. So I'm happy that they are part of the discussions. In terms of the refurbished, reconditioned goods, I just wanted to highlight that these category of products are already covered in our existing labeling standards, and we are making some improvements here. And just to be very direct in terms of the query raised by Ms. Bullard, one of the deficiencies we wanted to correct is that when second-hand, used, refurbished, reconditioned goods come into the country, we want to ensure that they comply with all the safety requirements. So that will be one of the critical aspects here to ensure that the consumer would be assured that the product complies. The challenge with these category of goods is that they would have very limited warranties. So I believe that, the issues we discussed before in terms of consumer awareness and education, Kimberly suggested the e-flyers is something that we could look at after we have completed the standard to touch on some of the topical issues, the issue of the certification marks and what the consumer should look for to pay attention if your product is reconditioned, if there are any complaints or direct the complaints either to the TTBS or the consumer affairs. So there are some issues that we can address from the consumer awareness side, and there are some issues that we can address from the regulatory side. And I think that would, cover some of the key aspects, and looking forward to the collaboration with consumer affairs, or the continued collaboration. So that would be very useful to ensure that consumers receive value for money, and also that they are aware of the safety requirements. And if they're uncertain, TTBS has the consumer liaison officer, so queries can be directed there. So on that note, I'm not seeing any other questions. So I would like to bring the meeting to a close. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the participants. I think we recognize a lot of the stakeholders here today. I would also like to acknowledge the participation of Mr. Kevin Bablal, who is the acting chief inspector from the Government Electrical Inspectorate. And just to highlight that the work that we're doing with regard to the electrical standards, it starts with electrical safety with regard to the installations, and we are going down all the way down from product standards into standards for components. And TTBS has a key responsibility there with the compulsory standards. So we have a vast amount of experience, as Irvin would have, probably glossed over, but we have a very active inspection process for electrical products, and we heavily rely on the third-party certification marks and the test certificates that come in internationally. So TTBS would do those assessments. What we have sought to do with these two standards is consolidate a lot of the electrical standards that we have on our catalog to ensure that they're up to date. And I would like to thank all the presenters, so Kimberly, Irvin, Nadine, for their presentations as well as their questions. So we are looking forward to all the feedback on these two compulsory standards, because your feedback is critical, and also to bring to our attention any issues related to challenges with conformity assessment, because while we have two of the main standards being represented in the document, we have UL and IEC, we also accept a number of certification marks from other countries. So I was pleased to see that Irvin would have highlighted some of those issues. We also recommend, and this is what Mr. Mohammed was querying, we also recommend the pre-shipment approval process be triggered. So any importer bringing in a new item can bring a sample and the associated documents to us, and we will evaluate. And especially with regard to the used, secondhand, refurbished, reconditioned, that will attract an additional layer of safety checks, as Irvin would have highlighted, as well as Kimberly. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. We look forward to any further comments. Please contact Kimberly directly, so she would have provided her contact information. And for those of you all who already engaged with us, Mr. Irvin Butchon would be very familiar to you guys, so you can reach out to the TTBS team. We appreciate your time and attention and your continued support of the standardization process. And I'd also like to thank the Consumer Affairs Division as well for raising some very important safety issues with regard to the consumers and consumer awareness initiatives as well. So thank you, everyone. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.